Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Yes, I'm ready tomorrow. A young 19-year-old girl said. Her name was Julia. She was an orphan now. Now, my dear, answered Grandpa, filling the various holes in the sewing machine with oil. Well, it's going to last a year, Grandpa said, pushing it to the middle of the big folding table. Oh, thank you, Grandpa. Thanked him Julia, hugging and kissing him on the cheek. Now for sure all the lines will be perfect, she exclaimed, running her hand over the sewing machine. But everyone at the table. The soup will get cold, said the girl, going to the kitchen. Maybe it will come out. What of it? Grandfather scratched the back of his head, adjusted his shirt, and came to the table. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of freshly cooked soup. Salad from a couple of eggs, and with cucumber perfectly complemented the lunch. The grandfather and his granddaughter started the meal. Oh, my daughter, with your talents you could go anywhere, said the grandfather, sending another spoonful into his mouth. Well, just anywhere. Pepper, asked Julia, and peppered her plate. Yes, I guess so, replied Grandpa. Within minutes, the plates were empty. Without drinking her tea, Julia went to her room. She couldn't wait to finish sewing a woman's elongated shirt, a model she had designed herself. The girl sat down at the sewing table and straightened the shirt, the color of young grass. Joining the two pieces front and back, she made a couple of side seams, then sewed the sleeves together rather quickly and moved on to the collar. The case argued. The girl's hands themselves longed to hold the fabric between her fingers, fold it, pull it taut, and pedal the machine. Wow, it's just magic, Julia marveled every time. Then literally for a couple of hours in front of her was woven a new interesting thing from the material that had been lying in the closet for years. She got the fabric from her grandmother, and the machine was given to her by a neighbor for pennies. She took another one, new and modern. Then Julia received this machine practically as a gift. Her happiness was unbounded. Finding curtains in the closet, Julia could not resist and sewed herself a blouse from them. What was her grandfather's surprise when he noticed the familiar embroidery on the sleeve of the blouse, which his wife had once made to cover the iron-burned stain. Wait, I can't understand, the grandfather said, scrutinizing his granddaughter's cover. Where did you get this fabric? Isn't that our curtain? Said he looked at Julia in surprise. Yes, Julia answered correctly, thinking it would upset the grandfather. Well, Julia, you're crazy, he laughed. But you are an artist. Laughing, grandfather laughed. It turned out cute anyway, he concluded. Then Grandpa went into the back room. After digging there for about 20 minutes, he came back with a gray suitcase with a padlock hanging from its handle. I forgot to tell you, he began. Here's your dowry, said Alexa's grandfather. Let's see what we have here, he said, opening two locks with a small, almost toy key. Juliet eagerly waited to see what the lid of the suitcase opened. In front of Julia lay neatly folded different colors of fabrics in green, and blue, and polka dots, flower, and light and dense. Wow, exclaimed Julia, going through one fabric after another. Wow, she rejoiced. Do you look, what a beauty. The girl took the blue fabric and held it up to her. The color very well shades the tone of the face in Julia's head. Immediately began to pop up different options of what the dress could be. Unbelievable, Grandpa. Thank you. Why didn't you show me before? She asked. And before, and there was no need, replied Grandpa Alex, and then, leaving his granddaughter alone with the dowry, returned to his room. He approached the picture, which was lying on his dresser, and ran his fingers over the face of the image. It was his wife, beautiful hair on her head and a noble smile. It was said that this woman had lived a good life, filled with love and joy. What cannot be said about Julia's parents who died on the airplane? They were on a vacation together at the time. Little Julia was left with her grandparents. When everything happened, Alexa's wife couldn't take it and soon passed away. So Alexa's grandfather and Julia were left alone. The grandfather took care of the girl, putting all the love and tenderness that the parents had to pass on to her. But Julia grew up a troubled child. She was an average student with little interest in anything. At first, she wanted to become a veterinarian, But having seen once not the most pleasant picture in the veterinarian's office, she was cut off. Grandpa didn't demand much from his granddaughter. He just wanted her to be happy and with wisdom to life and the world. Julia could not enter the institute on a budgetary basis, so she went to college to specialize as a manager. Strange as it may seem, but Julia graduated from college with a red diploma. That was the joy of grandfather Alex. However, it turned out that in life the manager is not the one about whom the students were told in the educational institution. And moreover, in already existing companies, so-called managers from the street are not needed at all. So Julia learned that in the real world, a manager is a salesman, and Julia did not know how to sell. And in the store to work in the girl lacked the nerve and courage. She would have stayed that way. Julia would have been out of business, if it were not for that neighbor who turned the wheel of fate for Julia. The sewing machine interested the girl very much. And it is not for nothing, because her grandmother and mother sewed very well. And with the availability of the internet, many skills and tricks for the willing open. Julia plunged headlong into the study of the rules of construction varieties of stitches of different ideas. Now it was impossible to tear her away from sewing. At first, she often had to challenge the details and then sew again. One day, Julia was showing off to her grandfather Alex in her next blouse. "What do you think?" she asked with a twinkle in her eye. "Well, nothing so cute," answered Grandpa Alex. From his look, Julia realized that he was hiding something, that something was wrong. She asked, again going to the mirror and twirling around herself, examining herself from all sides. Seeing nothing, she turned to her grandfather again. "What?" she asked, looking at her grandfather, who was laughing with all his might. "Why are you laughing?" asked his granddaughter. "Oh, daughter, I can't understand why." "One sleeve sewn inside out?" laughed grandfather, no longer holding back. Julia went to the mirror again. Now she saw her mistake. Yes, doing one thing for too long can have that effect. "Well," said Julia, "you know Grandpa. Nowadays it is fashionable to experiment." "So I tried it," replied the granddaughter, trying to keep a nonchalant look. "Well, then of course," replied the grandfather, and again rolled with laughter. However, over time, the girl burrowed and with not confused the facial side. Her skills increased. She stopped being afraid of the speed with which she sewed. Needed an electric machine. She learned to make even, beautiful stitches. Currently, Julia sewed for herself favorite and rarely on order for girlfriends and acquaintances. Since the girl did not know how to sell, she had to be satisfied with small customers. "You can post your work on VKontakte or another social network, right?" suggested her friend named Christina. Julia thought for a moment. Christina went to the table and picked up the skirt Julia had made for her. "Wow, how did you do it?" she asked, examining the fox shape that came out in the fabric. "Manual dexterity and no cheating." Julia joked back. "Do not realize, Christina, how lazy to sit on social networks." Julia said wistfully, "Julia, I need to wear a skirt today urgently." She smiled broadly. Her eyes sparkled with fire. Christina spun around near the mirror, turned this way and that, and ironed the skirt and adjusted it again. "It's decided," she said. "Tonight we'll go to a cafe," said the girl, admiring her reflection. "But what cafe?" "Today I have to finish opening the curtains," Julia objected. "You know, Julia, to work well, you must first have a good rest," said Christina. And on her way home, she left. "I'll meet you at the waterfront at 4 p.m. And Christina slammed the door. Julia was left standing at a loss. On the one hand, she had work to finish. On the other hand, she hadn't been out for a month. She looked at herself in the mirror. There in the reflection stood a pretty girl of medium build. Her white skin spoke of the fact that she rarely ever got out in the sun. Brown eyes, plump lips, and blonde hair. Clean-cut hair made Julia's face and herself a very even attractive person. The girl fidgeted at the mirror, then pulled her hair up and made her lips a tube. "Yes, I'm still growing up to Christina's confidence," she said. Then pulled out a summer brown and white polka dot dress. She had made it in the winter, but had never worn it. The dress emphasized Julia's figure very well, which had a slightly fuller veda and hips and sides. But this did not make her look worse. On the contrary, Her slight fullness gave her a certain charm. "Grandfather, I'll go with Christina." "Let's take a walk a little, because my head is spinning from sewing," she said, looking into the hall. Grandpa Alex read scientific literature. He liked to be interested in different theories and new views on life. Grandfather put the book aside. "But good. Grandpa Alex said. "Take some money," he said, holding out $10 at the cafe. "Maybe come in or to the movies," he said. Julia wanted to refuse at first. After all, Grandfather and so much does for her. But remembering about the buttons she bought for the new order, she agreed. "Thank you, Grandpa. You are so generous and kind." Hall, wrote her granddaughter, approaching her grandfather and hugging him by the shoulders. "Well, you will be enough to hang," joked Grandfather, screaming under the weight of the girl. Julia blurted out a smile and disappeared behind the door. Walking through the courtyard, she walked out towards the bus stop. The house they lived in was in a gardening community that was located near the city. It was surrounded by forest, fields, clean and fresh air. Julia liked this place. The bus came up on schedule, and the girl jumped into it. All the seats were taken. But in such a situation, it always turned out that someone always gave her a seat. The girl caught the eyes of women and men. To be exact, not on herself, but on her outfits. While riding the bus, the girl would casually leave business cards with her phone number. I can't say it worked, but it gave her hope that people would recognize her. "Wow, that's quite a style," Christina exclaimed when she saw Julia in her new dress. "What an incredibly beautiful polka dot. You did not show it to me." Indignant girlfriend. "No, I did. Just you do not remember," answered Julia, at the same time Luba from her work on Christina. "Awesome. Well, let's go to her," said Christina, as if she were the most beautiful girls in the whole world. "Let's go for more eye contact," Julia replied, playing along with her. Christina was the kind of person who is always confident in herself. They know their worth and know what they want out of life. Well, or at least outwardly give that impression. Nevertheless, Julia enjoyed talking to her. She was lively, interesting, fearless, and besides, it always amused her. "Oh, I'm tired of work. I don't know where to put myself," Christina said, as she and Julia walked through the city along the waterfront. "I'm so tired of talking to customers. Show this one to that one. Explain to that one. We'll redo it." "Oh," she stretched out, complaining about the fatigue of work. "But I want to be weak and defenseless." She did not have time to finish. A nice-looking guy with a small black briefcase walked in front of her. Christina smiled at him, and with a puzzled look on her face, she suddenly asked him if you could help me. Christina handed the guy a closed bottle of water. "It was too strong," she said, lifting her left shoulder slightly upward. "Anything for you," answered the stranger, and taking the bottle from her hands, twisted the cork, then handed it back to Christina. "Thank you. You've been such a help to me." Flying Christina threw short glances at the guy. "Glad to help," the man replied and continued on his way. Christina watched her lips in frustration. "What man?" She stretched out, glaring at him. "Which one?" Julia interrogated her, as if she didn't know what she meant. "Let's go alone," said Christina, making a few glacis, lighting up the waters. The summer day was warm and even hot. Only a hat saved them from the sun. The wind played in the leaves of the trees. Passers-by were in a hurry. They were buying ice cream, walking with children. The fountain was growing, letting the water jet high up, then falling, stopped for a few seconds. "It's beautiful here," Julia asked, enjoying the walk. The girl looked around and was glad that she could just walk with her friend and talk about nothing. Of course, who spends most of his life in the forest. "Everything seems beautiful to him," Christina replied, making eye contact with a passing man. To a stranger. "Listen, because of your fox on your skirt, everyone looks at her and not at me. That's not fair." The girlfriend was outraged. "Or maybe not on the fox, but on your lovely thighs," said Julia. Christina was much scarier than Julia. Her figure was really enviable. Christina thought, maybe. She stretched, and they walked forward again. After 2 hours of walking, the girls were a little tired. The sun was getting too hot. It was time to go to the cafe. The girls made their order. Julia retired to the ladies' room. Walking back, She heard behind her back the girl, "Would you be kind enough to bring the 8th order?" Julia turned around. At the table sat a young guy about 25 years old. He smiled sweetly and showed something with his hands, trying to convey to Julia his request. "Yes, over there," he repeated, pointing to the steam table. Julia looked over there as well. There was indeed a tray of food standing there. The girl raised her hand to her chest and silently, "I asked." The guy nodded his head in response. Julia decided that this guy needs help, so she calmly went to the bar and took the tray with the order, and then carried it to the 8th table. "Thank you very much," replied the stranger. Julia furrowed her eyebrows. "But I'm not a waiter," she said, finally realizing the guy was playing a trick on her. "I know, but thanks anyway." As if nothing had happened, he replied. Julia, who had just been taken advantage of, could not hide her surprise. "Aren't you being a little insolent?" Julia asked. He asked her. "It's just a small request," and that's all the stranger replied. Julia was even more indignant at his answer and looked away from his blue eyes. Coolly under the nose, in which stood various delicious things. "Then I have a small favor to ask of you too." She mumbled to put on a smile. "Yes." "And what is it?" asked the one, sending a piece of meat into his mouth. He began to chew it as if he were the king of the earth. "And I owe you a little dessert," Julia said, and took from under his nose cakes with whipped cream. "Hey," squealed the guy. "With your figure, I wouldn't make such a rash choice," smugly said the guy, and again dipped the meat in the sauce, sent it into his mouth, and indeed answered Julia. And with her other hand took a plate with a big mound of vegetable salad. And wait. He indignantly tried to stop her. But Julia did not turn around and return to her table. "Have you decided to watch your figure?" asked Christina, seeing a plate of fresh vegetables. "I decided to watch the people around me," Julia answered, and then began to eat a juicy salad. The guy who had recently lost his order, resentful, sat at the table. He was surprised and at the same time admired the way this brave girl fought back against him. However, he couldn't afford for anyone but him to be able to respond to him so cavalierly. The boy was slightly nervous. Finally finding something to say, he walked over to their table. "I apologize for interrupting your meal," he said to the girl. Christina's face glowed with a divine light. She listened to him, flapping her eyes. "But I must inform you that this is my order." "I paid for it," the guy said. "Yes, I know," Julia answered calmly, putting the last slice of tomato on her fork. Christina followed the developments carefully. The guy called for the waiter. "There's the girl, she took my order for herself," he complained to the cafe worker. The waiter stood at a loss, not knowing what to do. He asked for a receipt of payment. The guy began to look for the check, and not finding it, began to try to explain to the waiter the reason for its absence. While Julia calmly handed this check to the waiter, "Young man, I ask you to think of another, more intelligent reason to meet a girl," replied the cafe employee and left the company. The guy stood there with his mouth open, but when he saw that everyone around him was looking at him, he pulled on his jacket and, saying goodbye, left the cafe. The girls calmly continued their lunch. "What happened to impatience?" asked Christina. "You know, I really need to get out into the city more often," Julia answered, starting to eat the cakes. The friends laughed. After the walk and the cafe, they went home. Julia started sewing again. At this work, she calmed down and felt a good feeling inside. She liked working with the material. She liked the way the machine began to sew in her hands. Until a couple of years ago, there had been things between them. And disagreements. The machine was spitting now and then, the stiletto tangled threads, and once it just stopped and stopped sewing. Julia long persuaded her to return to work, until she discovered that the machine was not connected to the network. But that's all in the past. The girl skipped. "What did you decide on in the plans?" She was satisfied with the job done. The phone rang. Julia picked up the phone. A female voice said, "Julia." "Julia, hello. It's Wendy calling. The thing is that I can't wait long for the curtains to arrive by parcel. My nephew is picking them up." "Okay," she asked. Her voice was friendly and energetic. "Yes, good. They are ready. Can you come over?" Julia replied. "And he would also like to make a shirt for himself. Actually, it's my idea. I found the material. He's bound to like it. He's a bit of a nuisance, but that's okay. I want him to have a memory from his auntie with them. Please, from him Measures asked her politely. Okay, we'll do everything. Don't worry, Julia replied, knowing that this kind woman always pays well and is always satisfied with the result. An hour later, there was a knock on the door. Julia did not expect such a quick arrival. She opened the door and then went to pack the curtains. Well taken and alive, pronounced the nephew. I now shouted Julia from the room. Yes, we got in, she replied, stepping out into the hallway where her nephew was waiting for her. Julia, reaching through the curtains, looked up. In front of her stood the one with whom she had just yesterday quarreled. Hello, said the girl. Good afternoon, said the guy, drilled Julia cold blue eyes. There was silence. So you're the one who sews to order? He asked timidly. Yes, that's me, Julia replied, feeling extremely awkward. But what my aunt asked you to take my measurements, said the guy. Yes, of course, we'll do it right away. Julia replied kindly. Tell me your name, she asked. Max, he answered. And then he added, nice to meet you, Julia. He looked at the girl. Likewise. Without any intonation, she replied. When the measurements were taken and recorded in the magazine, Max was about to go home. Look, Julia, nice shirt off his neck. He's a nice guy, Alex's grandfather said, extending his hand in greeting. Max was a little confused. He didn't expect to see a gray-haired old man here. Then he shook his hand in return and went back home. From that day, Max and Julia began to meet, but they were not of a personal nature, but purely business. Before that, only one male customer had come to Julia, and that was an old friend of Max's grandfather. Julia was worried that because of the conflict in the cafe, Max would try to hurt her, but still she hoped for his judgment. Max was from a very wealthy family. His father worked as a lawyer and was highly regarded, and his mother was a bank manager. Growing up, Max did not need anything and always got what he wanted. He was the only child in the family, and therefore all the attention of both parents went only to him. In addition, he had an aunt, which Sol and him Nechaeva. She herself had 2 daughters, so Max was a favorite and spoiled child. He wanted to go to this institute. You're welcome. Didn't work out with the teachers. No big deal. We'll transfer you to another one. You want your own business? Try it. Here's some money for you. Need a car, please. A club to relax in. Son, you don't look so good today. Get a massage or go out with your friends or something. You haven't bought yourself anything in the last month. But go get money, hopefully, his mother said. Max lived a carefree and trouble-free life, surrounded on all sides by love and care. Max's parents did not hurry him to get married. They thought that it would be in time. When Max first appeared in Julia's house, he was extremely surprised by their modest dwelling. A narrow corridor, a small hall, and 2 almost 3-meter rooms. That was the end of their living space. How Julia managed to place a small corner to live, it remains a mystery after meeting Julia. Max was struck by her ability to be happy being in such conditions. Yes, there was a forest nearby, clean air, but still, in his opinion, it all looked kind of shabby. But despite that, Max wasn't going to get away with it. Such inexcusable behavior of the girl in the cafe, so every time he went to the shirt fitting, he kept complaining about the tightness in his shoulders, the width in his chest. One time he got seriously pissed off when he saw what the buttons on his shirt would be. What are those? Asked Max, coming to Julia to try on buttons for your shirt? Julia replied, as always in her calm tone, which caused Max to be even more annoyed. Do men's buttons look like that? Max asked, crossing his face in bewilderment. What do you think they should look like? Asked Julia, realizing that the guy was being picky. How do I know what they should look like? Isn't that my concern? He exclaimed, picking up one of the small white buttons and scrutinizing it closely. How does it look like a man's? Julia asked wryly. At that moment, Alexa's grandfather entered the room. But how is our boy happy here? He asked, looking at the shirt on the boy. Max looked from the seamstress to the grandfather and back again. Then, after a little silence, Uncle Alex answered. It's fine. Everything is fine with me, Max said. pulling a smile as wide as possible. "Well, that's great. We've decided on Button." Quickly concluded Julia to record the customer's consent in front of witnesses. Despite the fact that Alexa's grandfather was already quite old, he inspired Max respect. If he could joke with Julia, then at the sight of Alexa's grandfather, all the dope from him flew off in an instant. The guy felt awkward around him and even felt some weakness of his character. What could not be said about the old man's short haircut, gray head, tanned skin? Always well dressed. Alexa's grandfather commanded respect. His dark brown, almost black eyes, staring at me point blank, made me feel fear. "Already tomorrow morning I will be able to send your order to the address. And this is where we can say goodbye to you, Max." His name sounded special to her. "Why send it? I'll pick it up myself," said the customer suddenly, looking at Julia. And then, to conceal the reason for his arrival, he added, "I don't know." "All right, as it will be convenient for you. Grandpa Alex, please escort the guest." Angelic voice asked grandfather-granddaughter. He fulfilled her request. "Max, from me." Alex was a little confused about the denouement and the end of their joint project. It was as if he did not want to say goodbye to the girl. The next day, the same grandfather Alex opened the door to Max. "Good afternoon, Grandpa Alex. How do you say hello with a cheerful mood?" asked Max. Grandfather, extending his hand to the guy, replied that everything is fine. "Except that the sewing machine again became capricious," said the grandfather. "It needs oiling." His smile made the wrinkles on his face sharper, but from this his face was still as kind and friendly. "Yes, technique as a woman requires attention," Max added, waiting for Julia to come out, but she still didn't show up. "You've obviously come for a shirt," asked the grandfather. "I'll get it in a minute," he said and disappeared into the workshop. Max was a little puzzled because he had hoped to see Julia. "Here you go," said the grandfather, handing the guy a box that contained his new shirt. "Thank you." Slowly, Max reached out. He held the box in his hands, twirling it around as if stalling for time. Then finally asked about Julia. Not her personally. Grandfather often called his granddaughter that. She went to town to the sewing store to buy thread, and she called out some names. "Said she would only be there in the evening," replied Alexa's grandfather. Max was a little upset. He wanted to see the girl, but it did not happen. Having said goodbye, he left. When he returned home, he felt a strange feeling. A strange longing settled in his chest. An unfamiliar desire to see this girl had crept into his head again. He didn't think their meeting would end so quickly. The girl named Julia was definitely not what he was used to meeting in his life. Usually ladies themselves try to be the first to get acquainted with him, to become his girlfriend, to try to please him, to surround him with their attention and affection. But in Julia's life, there was a case that replaced her all around. He realized it immediately from the very minutes when she began to take measurements from him. Her gaze was soft and at the same time focused. It was interesting to watch her. When she was calculating the formula, at that second, she was looking directly at him. But it was as if she herself was somewhere else entirely at that moment. And when she grasped his wrists to take another measurement, Max felt the warmth and tenderness of her hands. But her grip was firm. As she grabbed, so she grabbed. Max sat down in the chair. He did nothing but stare silently straight ahead. For the first time in his life, he thought about how much passion this girl had in her life, how much she loved her work. This was something Max had never experienced before. He had never taken his endeavors seriously. He barely had time to start, but after a short time he lost interest. The very meaning of his endeavors and business projects lost interest. He realized that Julia was much stronger than he was, or rather her faith in herself and in her business was much stronger than she could imagine. Max slowly swayed both back and forth. At the moment, some realization was taking place within him about himself and his life. At that moment, the door to his room swung open, and a dog named Herman jumped into his lap at a run. The hunting spaniel, seeing his favorite friend, began to lick his face frantically. Max, by inertia, leaned back more than necessary. The chair lost its balance, and the guy with the pet in his arms fell on his back. The spaniel was frightened for his friend, and started licking Max's face with renewed vigor, trying to bring him to his senses. Herman, no, stop it. Max covered himself with his hands, trying to keep the dog at arm's length. Ah, Makamai, what's wrong, son? The mother appeared in the doorway. Max looked at her upturned figure. Are you not mistaken? Concerned? She asked. Max, shouting and overcome by the unbridled tenderness of the dog, rose to his feet. No, Mom, it's fine, he replied. Falling to the floor knocked a little of the homesickness that had come over him. We have important guests coming for dinner on Friday. We need your presence. She spoke, moving closer to her son and stroking his cheek. I love you, son, she said. There was greed in her eyes, as if she wanted more of her son's love in return. Okay, Mom, I love you too, Max replied, looking at his mother. The woman was her name. Nancy was slender and beautiful, and she was the envy of young girls. And no wonder, for she took great care to look after herself. Her white skin color gave her even more coldness. Blue eyes, like two shards of ice, piercing her gaze through. And only a slight smile on her face spoke of her good spirits. Nancy liked to wear her hair up high and always wore high heels. She often changed her closet daily, buying more and more outfits for herself. Nancy looked at her son's clothes. Her face wrinkled a little. Then she pulled out the cash from her purse and handed it to her son. Take something for yourself. You can't go around in the same clothes for long. It can lead to depression, she said, and then left his room. The spaniel followed her, claws clattering on the parquet floor. Max looked at his shirt. It was covered in wool. The boy took it off and threw it in the basket. Looking at the box he had brought from the neck up, he took the lid off. Inside was a blue shirt, and on top of it a small candy bar with wishes for a sweet life. An involuntary smile touched his lips. I think she likes me, thought the boy. Worn fully, he headed for the shower. The day came when the Max family hosted guests. The cooks had prepared an amazing meal. Champignons and cream sauce molded from the lower meat, many different salads, and much more. Everyone was already gathered around the table, only Max was late. Instead of going to the store, as his mother suggested, he went to Julia, who this time was not at home. He even decided that Alexa's grandfather was deliberately informing him of her absence. There's our son, exclaimed Nancy, as soon as he appeared in the living room. There were bright lights burning all around, candles lit. A couple of gorgeous bouquets of roses adorned the room. Nancy walked over to her son, put her arms around him, and whispered in his ear, "Here is the deputy's daughter. She has to like you. Understand?" She whispered, barely moving her lips. Max answered her with a smile, then smiled and said hello to the others. Taking the seat across from the deputy's daughter, Max began to put food on his plate. There was silence. Noticing the slanted glances, Max smiled broadly again and then complimented the girl. "Cindy, are you so charming? I'm glad I had the opportunity to dine with your family," Max said. The girl's name was Cindy. She looked a little old. Or maybe she was just tired of acting like a girl from an important and wealthy family. Her overly elongated face, long nose, thin lips made her expression slightly repulsive. She gave the impression of a crybaby when she smiled. Her thin lips, threads of sparkle, appeared in a strange line resembling a horizontal comma. Her small, short teeth seemed to betray her shrewdness not only in food, but in everything else. "Thank you," replied the girl with a pronounced net. Max almost laughed. He could barely contain himself, stuffing a piece of sealed duck into his mouth. Dinner had begun. The guests piled treats onto their plates. Conversation ensued. Max watched the guests occasionally when his gaze would come across Cindy's eyes. The girl immediately began to flirt. During another of her smiles, Max managed to see a cucumber, tire root sticking out of her cheek. It looked quite funny. "Yes, our daughter is like a diamond to us," her father used to say. "She is infinitely talented and very intelligent. She often amazes me with her imagination." The father praised his daughter. "Yes, you can tell," Max said, which caused a new wave of stares. "I wanted to say that the beauty of a man is expressed in his imagination and mind, and he was slow in beauty." He finished, trying to keep his mask of touching and frankness. "That's so sweet," Nancy said, stepping on her son's toe with her heel. Max, eyes bulging with pain, slowly turned to face his mother and then displayed a grin of white teeth. "Our daughter graduated from the High School of Mathematics. She also plays the piano beautifully," Cindy's mother told her. "Asia, play us something." She turned to her. "I'm not sure, but I'd be happy to," she said. And there was that funny sound again. The girl sat down at the piano. Her thin and sparse hair barely covered her shoulders. Her thin fingers went down on the keys. The girl looked at the guests once more, and then winded her hands on the keys. A dog waltz began to play. The two families listened patiently to the performance. Smiles were pasted on their faces, and only the spaniel, Herman, unable to bear the falsity, began to forget at the top of his voice. 2 minutes later, applause broke out. Joyful Cindy returned to the table. "What do you say?" His mother asked Max a question. "You know," Max replied, nodding his head. "I like the fun one," he said, and met his mother's cold gaze. "I mean, it's cheerful." The boy got out of it. When dinner was over, Max could breathe out and be himself. Nancy and her husband William saw the guests off outside. Max picked up a grape and tossed it toward the ceiling. Caught it with his mouth. Herman, even though he didn't eat grapes, he still envied the guy. The next day, Max went to Julia's again under the pretext of sewing another shirt. Julia talked to Max in a businesslike manner. Together, they discussed the color, the style, and also the buttons. When all the details were discussed, Julia said, "Well, I have to work. As long as I have orders, I have to keep up," she said, waiting for Max to leave the house. The guy stood at the entrance and nodded. He hesitated. He wanted to tell her something, to offer her something, to meet. But his lips were frozen. Max called out to Julia, seeing that he was out of focus. "I have to work until next week's meeting," the girl repeated. Yeah, I got it. Could you just give me one more second?" Finally, the guy blurted out. Julia listened attentively. "Thank you for the candy bar." "It was my pleasure," he said. "Yes, it was my pleasure," Julia replied, waiting for the customer to leave the house. "Have you decided to make up for the incident in the cafe?" asked Max. That the girl laughed. "No, I give all my customers a chocolate bar. It's my trick, like a sweet compliment," Julia explained, making Max feel uncomfortable. Once again, she was the smart one. "How about we get together? Unexpectedly for a girl?" he asked. Julia looked at the guy confused. "I'll take you for a walk into a cafe," Max explained. By this time, Julia had already realized that she liked the guy. However, at this point, she genuinely didn't know if she should accept. "We'll just go for a walk. We'll talk and eat. And then I'll bring you home," he continued to persuade. Well then, maybe Monday is my free day," the girl replied. Having agreed on this, the couple said goodbye. After the meeting on Monday, Max and Julia met on Wednesday, and then again on Monday. During the walks, young people talked a lot on different topics, sometimes argued and fooled around. Once Max invited the girl to drive his cool and beautiful car. Julia agreed out of interest. She had never ridden in such a car before. Max drove out on a free highway. The road was smooth and wide. The visibility was great. "Do you want to learn how to drive?" he asked, raising his sunglasses to his forehead. "No, I'll have a driver," cheerfully replied the girl, removing strands of hair. "Well, at least for a change," Max insisted. He wanted to surprise Julia and teach her something new. "Come on, I don't mind," agreed Julia. The car stopped on the side of the road. Max took off his glasses and looked at Julia carefully. Her copper eyes and blonde hair made her particularly attractive. Max lowered his gaze to her plump lips, but there was no easy way to get close to this girl. She loves and really values herself. Julia moved into the driver's seat. Max took her seat. "So watch," Max began. "You press the brake and clutch at the same time." Julia did as he said, now turning the key release, the brake, and slowly hit the gas. Julia was focused. The car moved. "Get out on the road and drive safely. Just don't go over 80, he warned her. Julia obediently followed his instructions. The asphalt quickly went under the wheels. The girl felt the pleasure of the process. "You're looking good," Max remarked, surprised at the speed with which she was getting up to speed. The wind ruffled her hair. The car glided smoothly down the road. The kilometers were behind them. Keys turned. To the left of the steering wheel, Max commanded. "And don't forget to turn on," he added. Max kept his eyes on the road and glanced at the girl behind the wheel. She was very beautiful. The green belted shirt looked stunning on her. Max caught himself thinking he was hooked. Julia had indeed gotten used to the simple rules quite quickly. On a free highway it was easy, but now the car behind them began to overtake their car. It passed very close. Max heard a grinding sound in the passenger seat window. A familiar face of the girl he used to spend time with peeked out, but then disappeared without a trace. She held her hand up. There was something metal clenched in her fist. Max realized that she had stolen his car. The hooligan's car sped forward. Max felt a rush of blood to his temple. He went into a frenzy. He tried to calm himself down, but instead he shouted equalizer at him. What Julia, who was already driving at 100 kilometers per hour, did not understand. Catching up with them, Max repeated, unable to find a place to sit in his chair. Julia pressed the gas pedal and the car started to pick up speed. Then Julia decided to get closer to them and turned the steering wheel to the right. Max saw his car driving straight at the offenders. He was scared. "Stop," he screamed. "What are you doing?" Julia, not realizing what was being asked of her, she took her foot off the pedal. The pursuing car began to slow down. "What's going on?" Julia asked him again. "I didn't have much time left. I wanted to get closer to them," she explained. Max rubbed his forehead. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that." "Aggressive driving is not encouraged," he said. "I'm sorry for what I did." "Who are these friends of yours?" Julia asked, parking on the side of the road. "Yeah, you could say that. I'm sorry I confused you," said Max. Then he got out of the car. In front of him were 3 long stripes, shimmering in the sun. Max raised his head with his hands and then got back behind the wheel. "I would not like to participate in such a showdown," said the girl. "It's not good for me." Julia was right. And Max realized it, but it was too late. On the way back, Julia drove again. This time, the straight road was replaced by tight loops that never seemed to end. "Pull over," Max said, but Julia kept going at a steady speed of no more than 40. "Brake," Max said, for some reason whispering, "Brake." Whispered again. It was as if he was afraid to upset the balance. Julia said, also in a whisper. The girl smoothly and confidently entered the corner. Then another one, and not Shika, and on me. Max said a little indignantly, "I'm not a chick." Already through laughter, said Julia. It was incredibly funny to her. The fact that Max had been whispering to her to slow down during the whole long right turn. This moment was quite strange, dangerous, and funny at the same time. The evening came to an end. Max drove Julia to the house. He contemplated her facial features, her bare shoulders. He wanted to touch them. He hoped for a kiss, but the girl, thanking him for such an incredible adventure, said goodbye and got out of the car, leaving Max alone with his waiting. Tough nut. Why so? Puzzled the guy. The guy saw Julia as a very strong person, even though she was 5 years younger than him. Max was surprised, amazed, delighted, and at the same time aroused a great desire to really show himself in this life. The girl showed Max this world in a different way. He was very much surprised when he learned that you can be happy about simple things, such as a good night's sleep or a successful jam, fresh tea or friendly communication with the customer, or the completion of work before the deadline. Max was unfamiliar with this. After all, he never had to hurry or manage anything. The cook would always make him tea at any time. A true, sincere friendship. He never thought about that. And in order to finish things on time, but Max did not have his own personal affairs for which he could be responsible. The lad knew that the time would come and he would quietly and safely take his mother's place. Julia had become an amazing person to him. With every meeting they had, he admired her more and more. He was literally enchanted by her. So sweet, gentle, and cheerful, and so determined, responsible, and most importantly, seeing the goal ahead. It made Max think about his future life more than anything else. Yes, becoming a bank manager is an amazing job, always financially secure. But Max wanted to learn how to overcome obstacles on his own and make his own path. At home, Max thought about how he could do something nice for Julia. He wanted to impress her, to accomplish some feat. All those banal rooftop dates or car rides were not feats. They were entertainment. But the real Max was racking his brains. A spaniel entered the room. Herman brought in his mouth a fashion magazine that his mother often flipped through. "Since when are you interested in fashion?" Max jokingly asked the spaniel. In response, he received the magazine and absolutely at length and palm. "And Herman?" howled the boy. He immediately pulled out a damp napkin and wiped his hand. Then his gaze fell on the fashion magazine. The guy seriously thought about it. For about 20 minutes, he sat still and looked at the cover of the magazine, which showed a happy girl in a beautiful and stylish lilac dress. The next seconds, a terrific idea hit the guy, which made his heart beat more frequently. It was now more than ever that he was sure that this was what would work, emboldened by this thought that had now grown into a real goal. Max walked out into the hall with a smile on his face. There he met his mother with Cindy. It turned out that the girl had come to visit him and give him a book that had become one of her favorites. Max displayed a grin, as his mother had taught him in cases when you don't like a person very much, but you have to be polite. "Hi," Cindy said hello. He returned the favor. "Thanks for the book. I'll be sure to read it a little later." The smile never left his lips. "I have something very important to do right now. I have to run away," Max said and kissed his mother on the cheek. He hurried away. "He is so cute and sweet," Cindy said, definitely feeling like the one Max was dreaming of. Nancy, realizing that Cindy was not interested in her son, smiled back at her. Meanwhile, Max came to the cafe. Before coming here, he had already managed to call several girls he knew. Everyone was gathered around a round table. The girls were eagerly waiting for Max to state the reason why they had gathered. "Girls, I'm so grateful that you agreed to come here. What I need from you now is real help, your smiles, and all your talent for posing. What do you think? Fun?" asked Max, confident that they would definitely say yes. "Last month you promised to call me back, and you never did." One of them was indignant. "And I waited for you for 3 hours. And now I have to help you at your beck and call." The girl grimaced, a disgruntled look on her face. Max furrowed his brow. He hadn't realized so many girls resented him. All his attempts to get girls to star in a fashion magazine had failed. "Okay, I admit it. I'm a jerk. You can hate me." "I deserved it," said Max. The girls left him, leaving him all alone. It's not that simple, the guy muttered to himself. However, remembering Cindy, Max jumped out of the table and rushed home. He met her on the doorstep. She was just leaving. "Cindy, what meeting?" Trying to hold his breath, Max said. "I have a tempting proposition for you," he said. Cindy looked at Nancy in surprise. There was hope in her eyes. "Can I talk to you tete-a-tete?" he asked, smiling slyly. "Of course you can," she agreed happily, her eyes bulging. She was discouraged by such a sudden change in her son's behavior. "Anyway, I have a proposition for you," Max began, telling her his idea. "So you will be on the cover of a magazine in the most fashionable dress." He finished. "I, of course, expected a little different from you, but I'd be happy to help you," she said. Max heard so much sincerity and purity in her words that he almost felt guilty about using the girl for his own purposes. When Max managed to arrange the models for the magazine, he went to Julia's house. The girl opened the door. "Oh, Max, hello. I'm sorry I can't be with you right now. I need to finish my pants," she replied. Max's eyes rounded, making them so pitiful that Julia melted. "All right, just no more than half an hour." "Okay," she said. Max nodded quickly as the guy shared an idea with the girl. Julia seriously thought about it. "It's cool, it's great. I love it. But where are we going to get the funds?" She asked a reasonable question. She wasn't used to anyone giving her such large sums of money. "I'll be responsible for all expenses." Max blurted out, "I agree." Julia answered immediately. She didn't expect such a quick answer from herself. However, it didn't scare her that Max might suddenly demand the money back. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she firmly knew that this had to end in success. And even if it didn't, the desire to start acting on it was very motivating. It would be a very interesting experience. From that day on, Julia began to actively prepare for the event. She had a lot of guests at her house. While one girl was trying on the dress and Julia was adjusting the material, the other 5 were sitting in the kitchen together with grandfather Alex drinking tea with raspberries and gingerbread, and the old man was telling the girls different stories from his life. "There was such a man in our village," Grandpa Alex said. "He had a lot of strength. What were his high shoulders like?" Grandfather spread his hands with spread fingers. "Here he goes with his horse to the forest to collect firewood." Then one of the girls interrupted him with her bare hands. She was perplexed. "Aha," continued the grandfather. "And so he loads the cart to the top and comes back with firewood. And it was necessary to go uphill." The girls listened with their mouths open. "And so the horse goes up the mountain, carrying the cart. I'm almost at the top, but I can't get it up. What should I do?" He asked a rhetorical question. "So the man takes the cart instead of the horse and pulls it himself." The girls gasped. "Aha." The grandfather Alex continued. "He strains and pulls it himself and lifts the cart up the mountain." "How strong was that?" finished the old man. "And what kind of man?" "Just a gift," said one of them. The others clapped their eyes. That's how the days of future models for the magazine passed. Taking off some clothes. Conversations with Alex's grandfather and tea. Julia labored like a bee, drew up blueprints and made patterns, adjusted dresses to the figure, selected material, downloaded details. Cindy watched over the discipline of the girls. Max all this time was looking for a suitable room for shooting, made arrangements with photographers and lighting. After a month of hard work, everything was ready for the show. Julia was very excited. Max was also worried, but what worried him the most was that he had managed to organize such an event himself, to gather people, to find a room, to think about advertising, and this is already a great success. "You look irresistible," Max said, turning to Julia. She applied her makeup with a deft movement. She drew one arrow, then another. "Thank you." "That's nice to hear," Julia replied, smiling at his reflection in the mirror. The music began to play rhythmically, the spotlights shining brightly on both sides of the spacious rectangular room. Sat the invited guys and girls, men and women. The host, who was Max's friend, announced the start of the evening, and the first pair of girls came out in summer jumpsuits, stylish, bright, beautiful. They strutted down the red carpet, swaying their hips with confidence. The efforts of Christina's friend Julia did not go in vain. They were followed by 2 more couples in overalls, shorts, and other colors. The audience in the hall sat in silence. At first, they couldn't figure out how to react. The second wave pleased the audience with summer dresses with long skirts. The girls looked very elegant and feminine in these outfits. There was applause. Julia, who stood backstage in excitement, watched the reaction and the assembled audience. Then the presenter paused and played a little game with the audience. During this time, the models had time to change their clothes and makeup. The music started again. It was already more assertive. On the red carpet appeared charming girls in women's shirts. Free cut was hidden on and belt and in the legend. This form of attire perfectly emphasized the waist, and from any type of figure created everyone's favorite shape. Hourglass men avidly saw off the models, who confidently walked on the stage, looking straight ahead. Everything about them was perfect. Clothes, shoes, facial expressions, hairstyles. They attracted playful smiles, men, envious glances of women. Julia, who had remained in the shadows all this time, trembled with pleasure and covered in goosebumps from the swell of their feelings. "For a job well done, aren't you cold?" asked her Max, who stealthily crept up behind her and put a hand on her shoulder. Julia flinched. The fright on her face was replaced by a smile. No, something was so tense. "How can one freeze?" the girl replied, continuing to watch the scene. The guests were happy, their faces shining. Cries of delight could be heard. Max took Julia's hand and placed it in his palm. He brought his and her fingertips together and felt some roughness on the surface of the skin. "It is better not to touch my hand yet," Julia muttered, removing her hand. She turned her palm upward. The pads of her fingers showed barely visible white spots, labor calluses. The girl laughed. Turning, picking, holding the cloth. She pictured it with gestures. Yesterday, to make time, sat up until midnight. She spoke with a slight smile. Max noticed again her persistence and stamina. He should learn a lot from this girl. "Are you incredible?" Max said. "I'm in awe of you," he admitted. Julia blossomed. "Thank you for organizing everything. It's a lot of work, and it's incredible." She repeated, raising her eyebrows high. The two laughed. Max moved closer to Julia. His gaze lowered to her nun-like lips. An unknown force drew them together. There were only a few centimeters between them. "Julia, get ready," reported Martin, who was the host. Having said that, he went to the dressing room to the girls. "How quickly the time flew by," said Julia, and disappeared into the closet. Max remained standing backstage. In front of his eyes stood the girl's face, which a second ago was so close. "Ladies and gentlemen, our event has come to an end," said the host. "And now I present to your attention the person who, in fact, created all these beautiful outfits with her delicate hands." Julia loudly said his name. Julia felt the heat in her head and ears. She was unprepared for so much attention to her person. "Come on, Julia, come on," Martin whispered, pushing the girl onto the stage. Julia walked down the red carpet. The bright lights were blinding. The photographer's flashes were confusing the landmarks. She hadn't realized walking back and forth would be so difficult. She saw the faces of people watching her intently, following her every step. Someone was pointing at her and saying something to his neighbor. The girl felt a slight dizziness. She wasn't used to so many eyes. When she returned backstage, her heart was pounding frantically and her mouth was dry. Max jumped up. He held her by the arms. "It's all right. You always can," he pronounced. You could hear the worry in his voice. Julia couldn't get a word out at that moment. She breathed and tried to calm down. And then Max felt for the first time that she needed him now more than ever. He convinced Julia to hold her against him. Everything was fine. Everything was cool. "You looked great," he whispered, swaying sideways with her. The showroom event was a great success. It shook up the city. Julia's name was on the lips of the townspeople. After such a big project, Julia closed herself in her home and did not want to go out. She felt like everyone was pointing fingers at her now. She realized that she was in no way ready for the scrutiny, attention, and to be noticed. Julia was lying on the couch in her room, with a blanket and a mug of chai and milk. After it was over, she wanted to shut herself in a hole so no one could see her. "Julia, hello my dear," whispered Christina. She entered so quietly that Julia didn't immediately notice her. Christina stretched out, getting out from under the blanket and hugging her friend. "I'll get you some tea," she said. Julia came back to the room with a tray of tea and sweets. "This is all so unfamiliar," Julia said, taking a piece of chocolate. "Do you need to get used to it?" answered Christina. "Or if you think it's a big deal." What a big event it was. Then imagine someone else doing even bigger and much, much more often. "So you're just one performer in a huge theater." The friend smiled. "Well, as for me, I'm thrilled. I enjoyed everything so much that I want to participate in it some more." Christina looked up and smiled broadly, imagining the next show. "And that handsome guy, named Max, by the way, are you two together?" Christina's eyes gleamed with cunning. Then she took a small cube of brownie, cut it into pieces, and sent it into her mouth. Julia was slow to answer. "I don't know, just socializing for now," she replied thoughtfully. She had always been cautious in her relationships with people, and especially with guys. She had never felt a great need to have a boyfriend. She had always had other interests in her life that she also enjoyed. After a day, Julia was back into her usual rhythm. It seemed as if the clothing show had been a whole month instead of 3 days ago. So much was it knocked out of the usual rhythm of life. The girl busied herself with sewing. Today, they brought her material for curtains. Julia pressed the pedal, and the machine sewed a straight stitch. And it calmed her down. Max had called once. But Julia did not worry because she did not think about him. There was a knock at the door. "I will open the door," Julia said and went to the door. Max stood on the threshold. He looked a little mysterious. "What's the intrigue?" asked Julia. Smiling, she was happy to see Max. The guy realized that he was seriously interested in her and decided to take advantage of it. "Uncovering the intrigue is worth 2 kisses," he mumbled, hiding his hands behind his back. Julia stood silent, not knowing what to say. "Okay, just one little kiss," Max spoke. Julia leaned her palm to her lips and sent the guy an air kiss. Max marveled, "You're a sly one." He objected. "That's not fair. You didn't specify what kind of kiss." Julia laughed. Max handed her the magazine on the cover. She recognized one of the girls from the fashion show. And at the top was a large inscription: "The sun shone on our city." The girl flipped through all the pages. The pictures were amazing. It was like she didn't make those clothes at all. It was unbelievable. "It's incredible," Julia exclaimed. Then she pounced on Max and threw him right into her lips. She jumped and cheered like a child who had gotten an unexpected surprise. "You're a genius, you're a wizard. How did you do that, class?" The girl couldn't believe her eyes. "I just made a deal with the right people," pronounced Max, satisfied that he managed to do something worthy for the girl with whom he clearly fell in love. "Do you have a talent?" Julia turned to him. "You have to know how to negotiate with people," she remarked, looking into Max's eyes. At that moment, he felt himself growing stronger in his own eyes and in the eyes of the person who was important to him. "Julia, be my girlfriend," Max said unexpectedly. "Your girlfriend," repeated Julia. "What does that mean, your girlfriend?" "I'm not a thing." She asked a question. Had she confused him again? No, of course not. Max was confused. "I meant that I'd like to ask you to go out with me. I would like to take care of you and help you." Max didn't have time to finish. Julia put her palm to his lips. "You can't know that." She spoke in advance and touched her warm lips to his. Max was over the moon. Max and Julia continued to socialize as they had free days before. They talked a lot, discussed different topics, went for car rides, swam at the river until September. Max, after a successful attempt to publish his first magazine, decided to continue this endeavor. At the same time, he created a YouTube channel where he published interviews with different interesting people of the city. It was Julia who helped him to discover in himself a unique ability to build relationships with people. And Max loved it. He felt it was his strength. He felt he could build on it to take the next steps. "Mom, are we going to have company tonight?" Max announced. "And who is it?" Nancy inquired. "Trying on earrings to match her dress. She got home early from work today and was going to get a massage. You look very pretty." Max complimented her. "Thank you, my dear," the mother replied. She stroked her son's cheek. "6 will be home." Max said goodbye to his mother. The cook had prepared marvelous food and drinks. Dessert was eagerly awaited. Nancy and William sat at the round table, waiting for their son's arrival. Husband and wife were a little bored. William was spoiling the soloist by trying to put it on a fork. Will's wife stopped him. The husband obediently put the fork down. But lo and behold, the tall doors swung open, and Max and Julia entered the living room. Max's father, William, was pleasantly surprised to see such a pretty creature beside his son. Nancy, on the other hand, raised her chin high and managed to cast a few glances at the girl from top to bottom. Max's mother was immediately struck by the girl's fullness. Julia was in a closed dress with a belt, but it still gave away her slight excess weight. "Mom, Dad, meet Julia, my girlfriend," Max said excitedly. Nancy rounded her eyes and almost opened her mouth, but hid it behind a wide smile. Julia said hello in the same way. "Ah, how lovely," lied her mother, discreetly looking at the full thighs, her son's chosen one. "Our son is such a joker," said Nancy. Julia, without giving any meaning to her phrase, walked with Max to the table. The boy helped her to sit down. William caught his son's gaze. He was genuinely pleased with his choice. "Julia, you probably can't have fat. You're on a diet," the mother said wryly, sending a piece of salted fish into her mouth. "I have to tell you," Julia replied, "that I don't follow any diets, and moreover, I consider my figure to be unique," Julia replied, which she was happy with. Nancy did not forget to stretch her lips in a smile. "Well, son, will you tell me how you met the charming Julia?" asked the father. Nancy glanced at him, hiding her indignation. Max remembered their first meeting. Julia looked at him with a request in her eyes not to tell him about the cafe. "Can I say that our paths have coincidentally crossed?" Max began. "I came to pick up an order already placed and to sew myself a shirt," he replied. "And who bothered to tell you that I could do the same?" "More polite?" asked Nancy and looked at the girl with some contempt. "Your sister, Mom, Aunt Wendy?" Max answered. Nancy choked. To hide her embarrassment, she took a glass of juice. By the way, Julia had her first fashion show this summer, with clothes sewn by herself from her own patterns. Max reported. "Really? Really?" exclaimed the father. "Congratulations. So you've been doing this for a long time. Maybe you graduated from a school?" Father asked. "Oh no, I am self-taught," Julia answered with ease. "A couple of years ago, a neighbor gave me an old machine in the closet. Found materials from a long time ago, and everything came together," said the girl, taking a bite of an orange caviar sandwich and sticking firmly above her upper lip. At this point, Nancy looked at Julia. Nancy, who herself was very much into new outfits and did not miss fashion trends, could not get it into her head how a simple girl managed to organize this project. "Julia, did you have money or savings to finance the event?" she asked, looking directly into the girl's eyes. "Was it your son's idea?" Julia replied. "He took care of all the expenses," she replied. Nancy was discouraged. Her son had taken money from the family budget. For some obscure girl. Even so. Nancy stretched out, looking at William. Max pressed the right corner of his lip. He had forgotten to warn Julia not to talk about it. His mother was very jealous of money. She counted her expenses daily, while always forgiving herself for big spends on clothes and furnishings. "Well, son, I'm glad you put your money in the right direction for once." William laughed. "Thanks, Dad." Max shook his head. He knew he had a habit of wasting his father's money on nonsense. "Julia has her own magazine," Max said. "But I'm not involved in that business at all," the guest objected. "The process of creating the magazine is completely organized by you," Julia said. "What?" the father asked, not believing his ears. "My son creates something himself. It's a joke." He laughed again. Nancy kept the mask of kindness, of desirability. In reality, she was being gnawed on from the inside by greed, by jealousy. She had time to notice that this girl really meant something to him. It was as if she was starting to feel herself slowly but surely being sidelined right now. Dinner came to an end. Julia thanked Max's family for their hospitality and a great dinner. "Yes, thank you, Julia. But I would still recommend that you eat smaller portions." "Yes," Nancy said. "I will certainly think about your suggestion," Julia replied. She felt an incipient desire to answer Max's mother so that she would not have any more thoughts about it. Max drove Julia home. "In front of your family, I look like a wire from the village." The girl laughed. "My mom, she's always jealous of me," Max said. "I think you get along with her," he said. After which they said goodbye. "Son dear," his mother turned to him when he got home. "You don't mean to say that you are really going to tie your life to this one, do you?" She was matching words with this girl. Nancy overpowered herself not to say the nasty thing. "That's exactly what I wanted to tell you and your father. And I think I've made that clear," Max replied. "You're upsetting me," the mother said in a voice ready to let a tear fall. "Mom, she's a good girl, determined," said Max, determined. The mother boiled over into a shouting match. "She comes from a poor family. What kind of determination is that supposed to mean? Such people have a bad reputation." She said in a steely voice she would tarnish our family. "Think what father will say," she asked in anger. "I spoke to my father. He liked it, Max said. He told you so because he knows your nature, which very quickly loses interest in everything around you. He thinks you're not playing and will calm down. But I can see that, the mother said, raising her fingers in a single point. You must stop all communication with her, Nancy said, changing to a calm tone. We can't have this kind of thing in the newspapers. We are responsible for our reputation and position in society. Go, she said when she had finished speaking. Max left his mother's room. Following him, the spaniel took over. He sensed that his mate was upset about something. Max didn't argue with his mother. He knew it was useless. This beautiful, rich woman, who is endowed with a certain power, is actually full of fears that torment her. But Max didn't know how he could change her point of view. As winter began, things slowed down and calmed down a bit. And when it fully came into its own, it forced the residents to wait out the hard frosts by the fireplace and with a warm blanket. Well, while they were basking under the soft stoves, Julia embodied new ideas of warm winter skirts, bright and interesting colors. She was happy when the customer was happy. Simultaneously, every 2 months under Max's guidance, a magazine with new models of both women's and men's clothing was published. To be in this subject, Max took considerable pleasure. But with the arrival of spring, life revitalized anew. The sun shone more. The earth walked more strongly. The energy of love and the desire to live began to move in people. For almost a year now, Max and Julia have stayed close to each other. Unable to wait any longer, Max takes decisive steps. Max, hello, come in, said Alexa's grandfather, opening the door for him. How do you say hello? Asked Max, shaking his hand. Thank you to say hello in front of us, replied Grandpa Alex. All three of them gathered around the table. Julia had prepared a delicious dinner. Despite her shyness and means, Julia always cooked deliciously. When everyone was about to start eating, Max suddenly got up from the table. I have a little digression from lunch, he said, leaving the table. Julia watched with interest to see what would happen next. Max got down on one knee and suddenly held out a wedding ring with the words, Julia, I offer you to be my wife, he said. He was so real in that moment. Julia glanced at her grandfather. He sat silent, with his spoon in his hand. This is all so unexpected, she said. Are you sure about this? Julia asked. I know you're changing my life around you. I want to make myself better, he said quietly. I'm ready to learn to take responsibility for my future family, Max said. His words gave Julia an inner thrill. I wanted to listen to them and listen to them. I agree, the girl replied. A gold ring was put on her ring finger. Forced Julia to cover the samurai. It looked marvelous. The wedding was scheduled in a month. Max, coming home, told his mother and father this happy news. He didn't care what they thought. He knew that this girl loved him and that he was ready to do many things for her sake that had never happened to him before. From what she heard, Nancy was silent for a moment and then still found something to say. Max, keeping herself in control, began to speak his mother. Please tell me it's not true? Are you just trying to mess with your beloved mother? She said. William came up behind her and put his arm around her shoulders. She paid no attention. Nancy put her hand on the bridge of her nose. Darling, say something. She turned to her husband. William shrugged. I trust my son's choice. What can I say? I can't make his heart fall out of love with this girl, he muttered. Did she blind you? Nancy exclaimed, walking over to the open window. You'll realize that all she wants from you is money. She has already forced you to pay for her wants in the form of ridiculous outfits and ridiculous fashion shows, she said. Her face turned red. The bad blood played out in the body of a mother who thought that since she gave life to a child, she decides who the child should be with. Don't say that, Max replied. I took the responsibility myself, he said firmly. You took the responsibility, Nancy grinned at him. Honey, stop it. You're making it worse. William tried to talk some sense into her. You're not getting married, are you? Nancy said in a cold tone. 2 blue shards of ice pierced through her son, after which Nancy walked out of the living room. The son tried to console his father. Don't worry, she'll get over it. "That's women," he said and went to follow his wife. From that day onwards, Nancy's life changed abruptly. Peace left her head and heart. From now on, she lived with the desire to separate the couple and bring her own son back to her. Nancy could not allow the one she had raised, the one she had invested in, all of a mother's love taken for herself, some shepherdess country girl collective farmer. The woman paced from side to side, occasionally looking out the window. She was waiting for Max Nancy to arrive. The maid's voice came out. "To make you soothing tea was offered by a woman in her early 50s. "Ah, Molly," the mother said wistfully. "I'm not at peace with myself. How can I talk some sense into my son?" she asked as she plumped down on the sofa. Her long summer dress spread softly on the seat. "I'm afraid I can't help you here. Is your husband right?" she added. "Bring me some hot tea," said Nancy in a voice filled with tenderness. She had always liked Molly. She was the only woman in her neighborhood from a poor family to whom she could confide all her secrets. As strange as that might sound, sometimes in talking to her, she felt like a little girl surrounded by her mother's love. Nancy herself, along with her sister Rosa, had grown up in a God-forsaken village. Having come to the city to study, they were desperate to escape poverty. They worked hard, giving all their time to their studies and work. Finally, their labors were rewarded. Nancy and Wendy graduated from a top banking school. However, Wendy soon married well and Nancy took a job at the bank. She started at the bottom of the ladder, but thanks to her skills and her acquaintance with William, who at that time was already a young and promising lawyer, she quickly worked her way up to the head of the bank. Having become a successful and wealthy woman, which is very rare for someone like her, Nancy could not free herself from the fear that it could all end in an instant. She had long ago had a big, beautiful house, a car with a private driver, servants, expensive things, delicious food, a favorite son, and a loving husband. But the feeling that she did not deserve it did not leave her. And now Julia, who appeared so unexpectedly, became a direct threat to her personal happiness. After all, this girl was a reminder of her past life, which she tried to forget, from which she wanted to get out of. "Nancy, the maid's back. Here's your tea, freshly made." She spoke affectionately, and Natalia's heart grew warm. "Max came home for a moment to tell you that he had some business to attend to. He had to go," Molly said. "I understand, you can go," the woman said in a low voice. Nancy sat with her fingers crossed. She folded them and then folded them again and spread them again. Nancy pondered further plans. The wedding must not take place. The wedding was a week away. Nancy put on her best pantsuit with an elegant cutout on the back, a wide-brimmed hat and glasses, completed her expressive look. Giving the driver the address, she set off to meet her. "Welcome to our private establishment," the pleasant girl at the entrance to the restaurant for VIP guests said. Nancy smiled at the corner of her lips and went to the table she had reserved. There was someone waiting for her. It was a man of about 47 years of age. He looked very young. The lilac shirt gave him a fresh look. Nancy took off her glasses and hat. "Hello, dear." The man spoke and kissed her hand. "I am very glad to see you. You are still beautiful and young." He complimented her. "Anthony, I am very glad that you agreed to meet," Nancy said. She looked at his smooth, shaven face, at the swarthy skin, and blue eyes shining with fire. "I really need your help. The case is not too serious. It's personal," she said. "My love, anything for you," he said, raised a glass of wine to his lips. "We need to kidnap one person for a while." "It's a girl," said Nancy. "Wow," the man marveled. "How dare she cross my queen?" Anthony went on with his beautiful words. He was an old friend of Nancy's. They had once been very close in their distant youth, but Nancy had opted for William, a successful and promising husband for the future. "Not to me, but to my son," she replied. "To charm him requires no end of money." Nancy lied. She didn't think Anthony should know the whole truth. "We just need to get her out of here so she can't find her way back," she asked as she bought a small red drink. "Yeah, easy." "When do we need to pick her up?" asked Anthony. "I'm sorry that woman ever left him." Nancy replied, fixing a lock of hair. "I'll give you the address later so you can do it from the rank." she said, and then she added, "Let's make sure that everything is neat and quiet." "Whatever you say," replied Anthony. Nancy put on her glasses and hat and walked out of the establishment. Anthony reached over and picked up Nancy's glass, which had her lipstick imprints on it. He ran his thumb over the trail. He regretted not being able to be her husband. Nancy returned home, full of energy. She was in a good mood. A smile shone on her face. She was glad that she would be able to keep her family out of misfortune. Max said cheerfully when he returned home after his many errands. With Julia's arrival, his life had taken on a new meaning. It was as if new doors had opened. He began to see things he could not see before. "Son, my darling, come to me," Nancy said. "I want you to know that I love you," she said, wanting to make him feel sorry for her. "I love you too, Moms," Max replied. After kissing her on the cheek, "Did your father give you this?" she said, holding out the envelope to him. "What is it that you don't understand, Max?" "I don't know what he wanted to tell you," Nancy answered. "I take off the jewelry and put it on the table." Max went back to his room. Opening the letter, he read a few lines. "Dear son, I am very sorry for the decision I have made, but I cannot go against the will of my beloved woman. I have to inform you that if you do not stop your relationship with Julia, I will have to close your bank account and also disinherit you. And follow your heart." Max was shocked. He hadn't expected such a turn on his forehead. Sweat was beating up on him, for the wedding was a week away. The restaurant had been booked. The guests had been invited. Everything had been prepared and was waiting for payment in the next few days. Max crumpled the letter and, taking his jacket, quickly left the house. Nancy went to the window. Max opened the door of his car, raised his head as gaze met his mother's eyes. Nancy experienced a thrill of excitement. Never before had she been in such a confrontation with her son. Remembering the promised address, she picked up the phone and dialed her sister. "Hello, hi. Listen, I wanted to make a dress for myself too. Could you give me the number of that atelier where you've been making mistakes lately? She's got that angelic voice. Why not?" "Sure, I'll send it right over. You'll be thrilled. The girl is very nice, sews professionally," said Wendy. Nancy kindly nodded to her sister. When the address was received, she immediately forwarded it to Anthony. However, instead of the usual "okay," she received a message asking, "Will I see you soon?" Nancy furrowed her brow. "What?" she asked in a full voice. Why the hell was she outraged? At the sounds, Molly walked into the room. "What's wrong?" "Everything's fine," she asked worriedly. "It's just the phone's on the fritz. And I need to make an emergency call," Nancy said wrongly. "What are you talking about?" "I'll pay you back." Nancy sent the next message and immediately received the reply. "I don't need the money." "You know that." "God, how awful." Nancy whispered and wrote to him. "When the deed is done, I'm yours." Her heart was pounding frantically. "Waiting for you tomorrow at the same place." Nancy stared at the messages with her mouth open. She was in a stupor. Then she automatically called Anthony. His phone was already off. "Shit," exclaimed Nancy, face in incomprehension. Meanwhile, Max went to the bank. The bank's app on his phone displayed the amount, but the guy couldn't withdraw it. Asking the female employee for help, he waited for a response. "Sorry, but unfortunately your account is blocked," the girl replied. Max thanked her and went to his car. However, what was his surprise when she was not there? Max dialed his father's number. The receiver said, "I'm in a meeting in another city. Leave a message." Dad really always put the answering machine on when he left on a business trip, not knowing what to do. Max caught a cab and drove to Julia's house. The door was opened by Grandpa Alex. "Max, hello, come in." As always, he was smothered and kind. "Are you excited about something?" asked Grandpa Alex. Immediately recognized the concern on Max's face. Julia appeared in the hallway. "What happened?" she asked, looking at the future groom, on whose face white spots appeared. "There were unforeseen circumstances." Max began to speak. "The thing is that my father blocked my bank account and took my car." He said, "What does that mean?" Julia didn't understand. "It means that we won't be able to pay for the party and the restaurant." We'll have to cancel everything and just sign for now. Max finished. I borrowed some money from a friend. It's enough for the first time, and then I'll get a job, he added. After the letter from his father, he decided not to return home. His grandfather kicked him out. Your parents cut you off pretty good. Then he sat down at the table. Julia suggested that Max also go into the kitchen. Yes, it's hard when you go against your parents' will, he said, and moved the mug of tea that Julia had just poured into a cup. The aroma of fresh, roasted tea was soothing, even embarrassing. Now you can look me in the eye, said Max. What's there to be ashamed of? You're already an independent guy. It's time to provide for yourself and your future wife. If you call me to the registry office, said Alexa's grandfather. I agree, replied Max, looking at the future bride. I'm more worried about how you will then communicate with your parents. It will be hard on the soul, said Julia. Bread and tea. God help you, replied the grandfather to his granddaughter and her fiancé. After the conversation, Max came to his friend Nikita. For some time they agreed that he would live with him. That's what they did. In the meantime, Nancy was wondering what to do. All her life she had been faithful to her husband. There had never been a single time that thoughts of infidelity had crept into her mind. But now, with her peaceful life and the happiness of her beloved son at stake, she was ready to go to great lengths. There was no time to delay further. At midnight, Nancy could not sleep. Bad thoughts visited her head. Finally, sleep seized her in its embrace. She dreamed that she was standing in a restaurant wearing a beautiful long blue dress. In her hand, she held a glass of red wine. Its Serbian flavor was pleasant. Then a swarthy man with blue eyes appeared. He approached Vanessa almost closely. It was Anthony. He took the glass from her hands and laced it to the bottom, then ran his wet tongue along her slender neck. Nancy felt unprecedented pleasure. She made no attempt to stop Anthony. On the contrary, she craved love. Gradually, she gave herself to him without abandon. When Anthony had completely possessed her, she heard a familiar voice. Nancy, the voice asked her, "What are you doing?" It was her husband. Nancy stopped, and Anthony kept on and on caressing her. The woman tried to pull away, but his hands held her with an iron grip. Then Nancy saw a multitude of curious eyes looking at her. Every minute it became harder and harder to breathe. And finally, Nancy cried out. I woke up in a cold sweat. The clock read 5 p.m. Nancy was taking a bath. A lush bubble covered her still young body. The woman stood up and covered herself with a towel. She then walked over to the closet, reviewing her outfits. Taking the first silver dress she could find, she placed it on the bed. Natural makeup, clear and straight arrows, bright red lipstick. Nancy had her hair styled into a perfect bob. Calling a cab, she left for the meeting place. The pleasant music was a joy to listen to. A polite hostess escorted the woman to the proper private room for VIP guests. Here, any topic could be discussed without eavesdropping. It's good to see you again. And my love, said Anthony, and as he always did. He kissed Vanessa's hand. Let's get out of here quickly. Please, said Nancy. She was a little nervous. You can't rush these things, Anthony said, loosening the tie on his light pink shirt. He always dressed tastefully, which had attracted Nancy in his day. You're making me take a lot of risks, Nancy said, trying to let him know her excitement. Do you too? Anthony replied and smiled, placing his large palm over her hand. How about a drink? He suggested, opening the menu. Nancy didn't know what to say. She had no intention of spending the evening with him. However, she had unknowingly entered into a dangerous game. The waiter brought glasses, wine, and a cheese and meat platter. You still make me feel things. Can you imagine, Anthony said, looking at Nancy's high cheekbones and sensual lips. Why didn't you ever marry that girl? Remember, she asked him, trying to change the subject to a more worldly one. I kept hoping that your icy heart would melt and you would come back to me, he said as he downed his wine and put a slice of cheese in his mouth. See, I'm still living that hope, he said unashamedly, examining the delicate skin of her cleavage. Nancy felt uncomfortable. She wanted to cover herself with a blanket when the torture in the restaurant was over, though. The couple headed for the exit. Anthony had taken care of the car in advance and where they would go. The man brought Nancy to his luxurious country home. It was made of wood and stone. Lamps burned everywhere, illuminating the green garden and the beautiful grounds in the street in front of the house. "Could you live here?" Anthony said, showing the beauty of his house with his hands. "Shall we go swimming?" he asked, looking at the pool. Nancy began to hope that perhaps Anthony had changed his mind about his proposal. The man unbuttoned his shirt and threw off his pants, then plunged into the water. For a moment, the thought of running crept into Nancy's head, but she remembered they had a deal. The woman took off her dress and slowly entered the water. "Good girl," pronounced Anthony under the words "closer." "Relax. Let's just enjoy ourselves." "When was the last time you were easy and direct?" Nancy did not see fit to answer. She floated on her back, all the while following Anthony's movements. "Dial it up," said Anthony. "I'll see you underwater." He dove in and very quickly began to approach Vanessa. The woman swam away from him, but Anthony caught up with her in 1 second and lifted her in his arms. Nancy gasped in surprise. "I like you like this," he said more and snuggled against her body, running his hand through her hair. He unraveled it, and the white curls fell to her shoulders. "I remember you like this," Anthony said and beat a passionate kiss to her lips. Nancy realized she could not escape. The next early morning, Nancy returned home. She prayed that no one was home. Once inside, she walked quickly to the bathroom of her room. The locked door and the silence gave her a sense of calm. She turned on the warm shower. Diving into it, the slinky water slid over her body. She tried to get away from the memories that vivid images were popping up in her head. Anthony's house was really nice and tastefully done. As much as he himself, however, her lips still remembered his kiss from the body touch of his hands. She had to admit that she was satisfied. 2 days before Max and Julia's wedding, Alexa's grandfather headed into town on business. When he had done what he needed to do, he didn't go to his house, but went to the address where Max lived. The door was opened to him by the service. She let him into the house. In the living room were present, oddly enough, all the members of the family, including William himself, Nancy, and Max. None of them had expected the old man to come. Alex's grandfather thought that Max had come to negotiate with his parents, but he had already made a decision, putting a wad of money on the table. He pronounced, "Here is the amount that is needed for the wedding. Max pays what is needed and that's it." "Pure and bright love is a gift," said Alexa's grandfather. William was shocked by his action. And Alex continued, "I see, and you probably do too, that our children love each other sincerely. So let's not take the sin of destroying their love," finished the old man, then turned around and headed for the door. "Grandfather Alex, wait," and shouted his Max. "Don't you know? Julia has been kidnapped," he blurted out. Grandpa Alex's face clouded over. He furrowed his brow, however. He immediately realized whose hands it was. He walked over to the table and looked at Nancy. She lowered her eyes, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. But the old man did not avert his own. "What dark eyes?" "Well, Nancy, do you feel good?" asked Alexa's grandfather. "A mother gives life to a child, and she is also able to take it away," said Grandpa Alex. "I don't know what you are talking about," replied the woman, turning sideways to him. "You hide your eyes." Shame on you, stretched out the grandfather. "Well, God is your judge," said he, turned around and left. All three of them remained in complete silence. Nancy continued to stare at the table. After the old man's words, she was afraid to meet her husband's eyes. "Mom, do you know something?" Max asked. William was looking at her too. She asked me, shifting her gaze from one to the other. "No more than you do." "I think that old man is crazy," she said. And then, citing the headache, she went to her room. "Dad, don't you think it's strange for a bride to disappear just before the wedding?" Max asked the question strange, not strange. "The man should be searched for," William said. Meanwhile, Nancy locked herself in the bathroom. With trembling fingers, she dialed Anthony's number. "Anthony, where is the girl?" she asked, expecting him to answer immediately. "In a safe place, like you asked. I need you to keep her for a week, a month, Or better a year I'll pay, she said with all her might, wishing it wouldn't be revealed. The greatest reward for me is you. And you know it, said the voice in the tube. Nancy pressed the corners of his lips together. You're not going to blackmail me, she asked cautiously. Why would I? I'll just always be waiting for you to come back. Unless, of course, it's important to you. Sorry I have to go to Julia, he said and hung up. Nancy looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection was gray and somber. Her eyes glistened with tears. Turning on the water, she tried to calm herself down. Nancy shuddered. There was a knock on the bathroom door from her husband. Honey, you're here. William waited for an answer, teddying himself up. The woman appeared in the room. Everything is all right, William inquired. How can I put it? I'm upset, she said. And why is that? Questioned William. Isn't this what you wanted? He added. Although William knew nothing about the girl's abduction, Nancy tensed. What do you mean? She asked. William moved closer to her and pulled her against him. Nancy couldn't look him straight in the eye. She felt as if William would find out immediately. She's pushing me away, William asked, seeing that his wife was avoiding his gaze. You haven't been yourself since this morning, he said. I'm just wondering if we did the right thing. But it's better this way. I'm sure, said Nancy, turning her head to the right. What's that? Asked William. Where's that spot with the little red dots? On your neck, said Nancy's husband. Nancy broke into a cold sweat. She covered it with her hand. You know, I went in for a massage, and there was this new guy. He gave me a bruise. Nancy tried to get out of it. The new guy, so William repeated. Nancy prayed to herself that her husband would believe her. Then William lifted her chin and looked her straight in the eye. Nancy could hardly stand the look in his eyes. She was afraid William would read everything in her eyes. A moment more and his lips pressed tightly against hers. I have to go away for a couple days. I can't stay. Unfortunately, William said. Keep me in the loop. Her husband finished and, leaving his jacket, left the room. Nancy followed him through the window. At some point, William looked up and Nancy flinched. She didn't want him to see her watching him through the window as William's car pulled out of the driveway. Nancy exhaled with relief. She walked over to the bed and flopped onto her back. Inside herself, she felt a sense of uneasiness from within. Meanwhile, Alexa's grandfather came to the police station. He had reported his granddaughter missing. A young uniformed policeman lazily walked to his desk and invited the grandfather to sit in a chair. Tell me if it's missing today, he asked, picking up a ballpoint pen. He played it between his fingers. Yes, all of a sudden it disappeared. The thing is, she wasn't going anywhere. She and her fiancé are getting married in 2 days, Grandpa Alex said, keeping an eye on the policeman. But these are brides. Girls are all worried before the wedding, pronounced the young police officer. Wait, she'll be back. Maybe she went to a girlfriend or something. He said. So Grandpa's lazy. Why don't you go home? The policeman concluded. Afterwards, he held out a phone number and said that if the girl didn't return in 3 days, they would organize a search. 3 days and 3 days can do anything to a man, the old man muttered. But what else was there for him to do? Grandfather Alex stood up and left the office. On his return home, he met his friend Julia with Christina. The girl in dress was waiting for him at the gate. Where did our Julia go? She asked, fending off you and the flies. Christina couldn't get through to her since morning. Is our Julia missing? Answered the grandfather. How did she disappear? I don't understand you, Grandpa Alex. Christina said. What do you mean missing? They had a fight with Max, she asked. That's the thing, everything is fine between them. I went to the city today, then to Max's parents, and he was there too. Max told me that Julia was missing. Her cell phone was off. I stood around, then I went to the police, and I just got home. And Julia was still gone, Grandpa said. I opened the lock with the key. What do we do now? Christina sits down on the chair. She put her hand to her lips, looking from object to object, as if she wanted to find a clue among them. Wait, what to do? Maybe she really will come on her own, Alex said. Nancy. I was lying on the bed with my arms out to the sides. In a matter of days, she had turned her life upside down, remembering Anthony's tender kiss. She ran the pads of her fingers over her lips. There was a knock on the door of the room. The woman flinched. Max appeared in the doorway. "Ah, son, it's you," she said, bringing herself back to normal. "Mom, I wanted to ask you a question," Max said, taking a couple of steps toward her. "Go ahead. I'm listening," Nancy replied, moving over to the couch. Nancy turned to Max so that he wouldn't see the stain that was left by the encounter with Anthony. "Mom, tell me the truth. You didn't say anything like that to Julia. What would make her disappear?" asked Max, approaching her desk where she usually did her makeup. "No, son, no." "Why would I do that with a look of incomprehension on my face?" answered Nancy. "Yes, I admit that your father was cruel to you, depriving you of your money. But it's all for your own good. You'll thank me later," she said. Max had his back to her. He was looking at the various cosmetic items on the table. Then his gaze fell on a piece of paper of exactly the same texture on which the letter from his father had been written. He gently pushed the sheet toward him, and another sheet was revealed, on which something was written in his mother's hand. At this time, Nancy was massaging her whiskey. She wanted her son to see her suffer. "I hear you, Mom, I'm sorry." Max walked over to her. "I love you," he pronounced, and then hurriedly removed himself from her room. Max went into his own and quickly unfolded the written sheet. On it, in Nancy's handwriting, was written everything he had read in the letter from his father. He knew now that his mother had thought it all out, and that she was just telling his father. The door shrieked open. Max crumpled the sheet sharply and turned around. It was a spaniel. With a wistful look, it came toward him and nuzzled against his leg. Max reached down and rubbed his neck. Max then packed up some of his things and left the house, heading to a friend's house where he was staying for the first time. Living at Julia's house was a little wrong for him. Yes, and there wasn't much room, since she takes customers at home without saying anything to her mother. Max got into a cab and drove away from the backyard of the house. Nancy went downstairs, calling for her son. Realizing she was home alone, she called Anthony again. The phone was still unavailable. Maybe it was for the best, though, she said to herself. What if something happened to the girl? A bright thought flashed through her mind. It's not my concern anymore, she reassured herself. Would you like to relax a little? The man asked, pouring himself some hot drinks. Anthony approached the girl and offered her a drink. She refused. What's your name? Julia? He asked after he had soaked his throat with a cold drink. The girl nodded her head. I don't understand your behavior. The girl said, looking around. It was obvious that the interior was chosen by professionals. I would not like to stay with you for a long time, said Julia. Let's hurry up. I'll take the measurements for your curtains. I'll calculate how much material I need, and then I'll go home. Okay, take the measurements. Anthony replied casually. Leaving the girl alone, he went upstairs and went about his business. Julia got to work. She hoped that since Anthony had recommended her to Nancy, maybe she had changed her attitude towards her. She had no idea that she was here for something else. All done, Julia pronounced, when she finally changed everything. No one was helping her with that. Sketch out a few designs for the curtains. She waited in the living room for Anthony to return. When no one answered her, she called out to the owner of the house once more. Silence alarmed the girl. She felt a little uneasy in such a large house. Anthony's house was like the dwelling of a dragon. Stone replaced wood and wood replaced stone. The sunlight barely filtered through the closed blinds. Looking for the owner of the house, the girl went upstairs. The different pieces of furnishings enticed Julia. It was as if she had entered another world that beckoned her with its uniqueness. The girl's attention was attracted by a statuette made of pure wood. It was a dragon, every scale of Inca. Each lesson was crafted with precision. Most eerie of all were the dragon's orange eyes. Standing just above her height, he looked confident, straight ahead, and without a drop of pity. The girl felt like touching him. She reached out to touch one of his sharp teeth. They looked just like the real thing. Careful, you can be amazed, rang out behind her back. Julia gasped. You finally showed up? Julia answered, turning to the dragon again. Whose job is this? She asked. I don't remember, it's some kind of craftsman. Anthony waved it away. Julia looked at him in disbelief. The measurements are ready, Julia said, holding out a notebook of sketches to him. You're not bad at sketching, she said. No one has ever drawn my dwelling so precisely on one sheet of paper with a pencil. Julia thanked him and smiled. I'll order a cab. Will you give me the address? Julia insisted, realizing that their conversation was on the edge of business and personal. As she was about to pick up her phone to dial the number, she realized it had been left in her purse in the lobby. Why a cab? Do you need me to drive you? Pronounced Anthony, but only a little later. I'd like to talk to you a little longer. Let's use the first name. Julia was confused. I would love to talk to you, but I have a wedding in 2 days. So I'd like to get home as soon as possible, Julia said. And it was true. I know. Nancy told me, said Anthony, and I put my hand against the wall so that Julia was sandwiched between the dragon and the man. Are you and Nancy lovers? She asked him, wanting to be discouraged by the question. But the man did not give in and answered calmly. Perhaps it seemed that Anthony liked to stuff himself with such games, not wanting any more part of it. Julia, with a sharp movement, kicked Anthony between the legs, then pushed him away. She rushed down the stairs toward the exit. But when she pushed open the front door, it was locked. She started to turn the knob to unlock it, but it wouldn't budge. Apparently, it was locked with a key that was nowhere to be found. Julia rushed to the nearest nightstand to find the key, but there was nothing there. Anthony appeared on the second floor. Endure the pain. He was already on his way downstairs, but he was in no hurry at all. On the contrary, he enjoyed watching the girl desperately trying to find the key. When the man was already a few steps away and the key was still missing, Julia rushed into the interior of the house. She didn't know where she could hide, but ran into the nearest room. She locked herself from the inside. Her heart was pounding frantically and her temples jostling. She was riddled with worry. A knock on the door made her flinch. Anthony's voice was heard. Julia, I'm sorry, it was a bad joke, he muttered. I demand my belongings and my cell phone with the address of your house. The girl said in a serious tone. Julia, understand, I can't do that. I promised one person that you would be here for a while, answered Anthony. He thought that a girl from the suburbs could be quickly lured to his side. What do you mean here? Get my phone here immediately. Otherwise, I'll have to make a very big mess in your house, said Julia. And she wasn't kidding about the mess. The cleaning lady comes regularly to clean the house, so you don't have to worry, but I can't let you out. I keep my promise, said Anthony. There was silence for a while. And then Julia heard footsteps. And a moment later, the sound of a door slamming shut. The girl realized he was gone. She pulled back the deadbolt, but the door was now locked from the outside. Oh no, Julia said. What was this nonsense? She couldn't understand why she was being kept here. And then it hit her. That's what Anthony had said. Nancy had told him to bring her here in order to keep Max and her from signing off. The thought made her head spin after sitting in silence for an hour. Julia wanted to go to the bathroom. Literally, need made her look around the room. It was spacious and bright, even though the windows were also covered with blinds. The room had a large and soft sofa, a couple of armchairs, and a wide table. And then my gaze fell on another door. Behind it was a bathroom with a shower and a toilet. Julia went back into the room and continued her explorations. She went to the window. It was unlocked. The girl opened it freely. At that moment, it seemed to her that all her problems were solved. However, when she opened the window, she was greatly surprised to find that it was at least 5 meters to the ground. What kind of paradox is this? She thought. But then she remembered that she had run down a small staircase and had come to a door that led to this room. Looking around the cabinets that were here, she found nothing of interest to her. This room resembled a meeting room or a study for privacy. There was nothing superfluous here. Tired of wandering aimlessly, Julia plumped down on the sofa. The hot day tired the girl, and soon she fell asleep. Meanwhile, Nancy was hurrying to meet Anthony. She wanted to pay him a decent amount of money so that he would stop torturing her and not make any more appointments. Anthony himself had called her, and the woman had rushed to take advantage of it. The driver was taking her to her car. Nancy was nervous. She was in a hurry. She wanted to get away quickly. Suddenly, the car stopped. "What's wrong? Why aren't we going?" She asked the driver, but he didn't hear her because he had already gone outside. A moment later, the passenger door opened, and the driver told her they had arrived. Then he gave her his hand. Nancy placed her own on his palm, and when she looked up, she saw her husband in front of her. William said confusedly, "You were supposed to." She didn't finish. "Isn't it good to have you home already?" she said, feigning joy at the reunion. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Anthony in the distance. He was walking towards the restaurant. "Weren't expecting him?" William asked, putting his hand on his wife's back. He had to cancel his business trip due to some circumstances. Was the surprise a success? "I agree," said Nancy, going over in her head the possible reason for her being here. "Let me walk you out," offered her husband, giving Vanessa an elbow. She laughed. "There's nowhere else to go. My tailor has just written that his plans have changed and he won't be able to meet me today." Nancy lied, blooming the foam in front of William's face. "What's with the non-seriousness?" William made a joke. "Well, then maybe the two of us can have lunch while we're here," he suggested. With a bright smile, Nancy agreed. Husband and wife entered the restaurant. Costas escorted them to a free table. Yes, and here it was not bad, William noticed, seated on a comfortable leather sofa. Nancy cast brief glances around looking for Anthony. He was sitting to her right and slightly behind William. "Yeah, I like this place too," she muttered, a sweet smile. Her cell phone rang. Seeing Anthony's name on the phone screen, she turned pale. Rejecting the call, she hid it in her purse. "Who is it?" her husband inquired. "It's my sister calling. She wants me to help her pick out an outfit for the wedding." Nancy lied. She was ashamed of having to lie. "Why didn't you answer it?" Sat down her husband. At this time, Nancy glanced at Anthony, who was dialing her number again. She held a concerned look on him for a couple of seconds. "What's wrong with you?" asked her husband, turning around. But by this time, Anthony had already left his table. Nancy sighed with a sigh of relief. It seemed that the tailor had come. "But I was wrong," Nancy replied as she began her meal. The waiter had just brought the appetizing dishes. After dinner, William and Nancy stopped at a place for a while, and then they returned home. "We haven't been paying much attention to each other lately," William said, stroking Nancy's hand. William was right. The various affairs were a great distraction from family life. It seemed that the person you had been with for years would always be with you, and you could spend time with them at any time. And in reality, that day keeps getting put off and put off for later. "Now I'll give you a relaxing massage," said William, and opened the drawer to pull out his wife's favorite passenger. "Oh, where did you get that?" asked William. "When I saw a beautiful piece of jewelry in there. I didn't tell you. I bought it for myself for my son's wedding." Nancy lied again. It was a necklace Anthony had given her when she'd rushed to meet him. She took it out of her purse and put it in a drawer. "I don't remember you ever liking that color combination," her husband said. He didn't show it, but inside he had doubts about Natalia's loyalty. Lately she had been distracted, according to the driver, often traveling to the same place for appointments. William lowered himself onto the bed and began gently modeling his lover's back with her smooth silk. The clear skin was driving him crazy. When her back the couple claimed, he gently touched it with his lips. William opened his eyes. Dusk was thickening in the room. The sun had almost set over the horizon. He turned his head and saw that his wife was sound asleep. William silently got out of bed, going to his room. The burned screen of Nancy's phone made him stop. His eyes read the text on their own. "My queen likes to take risks." William wondered who it could be from. He felt rage filling him. He couldn't resist and read the entire message from a user named Anthony. The first minute, he wanted to immediately confront his wife. However, seeing the familiar name Julia in the correspondence, he decided to wait. Taking Nancy's cell phone with him, he went to meet his son. William drove up to his friend Max's house. His son met him. Together, they walked into the house. William asked if they could talk privately. And then he told his son everything. "Max, don't be silly. You can't get hot. You'll make things worse," the father said. Max walked back and forth with his hands on his head. "Now the most important thing is that the girl was all right," said the father. Yeah, you're right." "How do we get her out of there?" Max wondered. Only simple X options came to mind. Night had fallen outside. The fresh, cool breeze was very pleasant. A black Jeep behind tinted windows pulled up in front of Anthony's house. The man was getting ready for the meeting. He put on his best suit, offspring all the best fragrance. He was glad that Nancy had come to see him again. Anthony opened the door and was stunned. He was sure it was his favorite woman, so he didn't look at the camera. Standing in front of him was William. His eyes penetrated Anthony through and through. The one threw into a sweat trying to pretend that all was well. He portrayed on his face a look of surprise, which was replaced by a smile and joy at the meeting. How many years, how many winters? Just like that, William stopped him half-heartedly. He launched a solid fist in a single blow, knocking him to the ground. Anthony went tumbling backwards. William entered the house, looking around. Max came in after him. "Where is she?" he asked Anthony with an angry look. "Who exactly?" Anthony turned on the fool and then laughed. Max walked up to him and, taking him by the collar, shook him properly. "If you've done anything to her, I'll give you a hard time," growled at Max. William hastened to relieve him. Anthony spat on the floor. "That's how karma catches up with a man. Now your wife and your fiancé are mine." He laughed, in spite of them. "Julia," shouted Max, and then went upstairs, looking in every room. While the men were downstairs, Julia, unaware that they had already come for her, found something to do. In the corner of the room, she saw a sewing machine, and to calm herself down, she began to sew. The space and conditions allowed her to sew. There was also a small refrigerator in the room, something like a minibar, and she got a couple of fruits and cookies and continued sewing. Time flew by very quickly. She didn't notice that it was already dark outside. A strange noise that hadn't been there before made the girl take her foot off the pedal and listen when she realized Max was calling her. She started to knock and called his name back. "Better hold still," said William, pointing a gun at Anthony. "Whoa, someone wants to play," Anthony said, slowly getting to his feet. "I'm not going to have anything to do with you," William replied. "We're here to pick up my son's fiancé." "I don't care about anything else," William said, so as not to cause more conflict. "Just like you took my bride from me once," shouted Anthony. And the next second, he had a gun in his hand too. "You know she made her own choice. And yes, I love my wife, even though—" William was silent, even though he had to finish the sentence. "She chose me this time," Anthony said, provoking William to more conflict. But in the meantime, Max had found the room where Julia was. But the door was locked. Max tried to break it down, but it wouldn't budge. Grabbing the nightstand in his hand, he rushed up the small staircase and with all his strength crashed into the door. Unable to withstand such an onslaught, it burst open into a lock. Max exclaimed joyfully, "Julia, I knew you would find me." "I felt it," she said, clutching Max to her chest. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" Max asked. "Don't worry, I'm fine. No one did anything to me," she replied. His embrace. Max and Julia were coming downstairs. The first to go was Max. On the corner, he noticed that his father had a firearm in his hands, just like Anthony. Max was afraid for his father. Julia stuck out her chassis, managing to cover her mouth. "Stay here," Max whispered. Julia lifted her lips, clutching at Max's sleeve. She didn't want to let him go since Anthony was standing with his back to Max. This allowed the guy to get very close. "You have to make amends," Anthony said, referring to the fact that Nancy didn't choose him. William answered well and lowered the gun. "Shoot. I deserve it," he said. Anthony felt the taste of victory and the approaching pleasure of retribution. He took the gun off the safety on his forehead. He stepped out, then another second, and there was a bang, and then a shot. Anthony fell off his feet. Max managed to disable him by hitting the huge statue. When he shifted his gaze to his father, he saw a red stain on his shoulder, which he covered with his hand. Max quickly called an ambulance. The marriage ceremony began at 1 o'clock sharp. Julia was irresistible. The wedding dress, which had been sewn to her own pattern, was eye-catching and made her want to get one. Max looked at the bride with admiration. He could not believe that, despite the difficulties, their wedding had taken place. "Son, you're not mad at me." But his father asked him a letter. When all the guests gathered at the restaurant after the registry office, "No, Dad, you had every right to do that," replied Max, who did not care how much money he had in his account. "When there is a man around for whom you want to do real deeds, I knew you could do it," said his father, patting him on the shoulder. Max turned and saw Alexa's grandfather. The old man winked at him. It's good to take risks when you have a safety net in the form of good people, Max thought. Nancy, who had taken this desperate step, certainly felt guilt and shame. But Julia's sincere attitude and her husband's inner strength helped her to remain human. After all that happened, Nancy and William became estranged from each other. It is understandable that forgiveness takes time. Anthony, after coming to his senses, cut Nancy out of his life for good. The newlyweds were able to open a sewing studio. Julia came up with clothing models, created patterns herself, and Max was engaged in advertising and sales, not forgetting about the issue of a fashion magazine. Alex's grandfather continued to live in his old house. Now that Julia and Max had moved into their own house, he was finally able to get a cat, which he had not allowed himself before because of his granddaughter's allergies. The life of the townspeople went on as usual, and only the spaniel Herman was languidly walking around the house looking for a companion to play with.